afternoon, Rotarians and guests. My name is Tony Battini. I'm the MC for today. We'll start the meeting by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians. And welcome to our hybrid meeting online people. Thanks today we're given by past President Philip Endersby, followed by a loyal toast presented by President Philip. So remain upstanding for the reflection and the toast. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, according to the United Nations, the 30th of July is the International Day of Friendship. In a time when the noise of division grows louder, fueled by wars, conflicts, inequality and fear, friendship feels almost radical in its simplicity. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or policy. It doesn't need speeches or signatures. It begins with something quieter, a conversation, a shared moment, a willingness to see one another not as strangers, but as fellow travellers through the human experience. In this year's observance of the International Day of Friendship, we're reminded that real peace is forged not only in negotiation halls or by writing into treaties, it's built thread by thread in the trust we extend to one another in daily life. Friendship, especially amongst young people, holds a special kind of power. It can cross languages, faiths, and histories that might otherwise divide us. It invites us to listen before we judge, to stay when more than a bond, it becomes a blueprint for reconciliation. It teaches us that understanding isn't a grand achievement. It's a habit, a practice, and a way of moving through the world that says your well-being matters to me. This year, as the world faces profound ruptures between nations, within societies, and even within families, the call to friendship is not sentimental. It's essential. It's about reaching across what breaks us and daring to believe in something better. It is a call to imagine a future where difference doesn't mean distance, where trust is stronger than fear. Through friendship, we don't just cope with the world as it is, we begin to shape the world as it could be. For the meal we're about to eat, for those that made it possible, and for those with whom we're about to share it, we are thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, Past President Philip. And I can assure you there are only two Philips on the agenda today, so you shouldn't get too confused. Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Thank you. Please be seated. We will be breaking for lunch and we will reconvene at 1:10. And for those online, yes, we've got some. Please take up the offer of a Zoom breakout room, which will open shortly. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful ring of the bell, Tony. Members, visitors and guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our fifth meeting of this Rotary year, our 5,088th club meeting in our 103rd year. It's great to see you all here today, including those online. Our guest speaker today is former member David Olsson, National President of the Australia Business Council. David will be speaking in Australia and China, stabilised, but where to from here? He'll be more formally introduced by our Chair of the Day, Chris Wong, later in the program. In the meantime, if you could acknowledge, and David, if you want to just stand for a brief moment, and welcome David back to the club. We have as our guest Ashley Chandler, just over there, outgoing Rotary Foundation Scholar. We'll be hearing from Ashley shortly. And also here we have James Scuderi, who'll be inducted into the club shortly. Could you please join me in acknowledging making Ashley and James welcome? So we have other visiting Rotarians, visitors and guests of members. I invite you and your host to stand when your name is announced, and if you could remain standing to enable the club to welcome you in a collective manner. So there'll be one big round of applause for you all, so you'll all get the same level of applause, so that's very important. But we have Chrysanthemum Pregatsis, a guest of Sue McDonald, Thisbe Lara, also a guest of Sue McDonald, Tempe Jara, a guest of Mimi, I think. So, yeah. Peter Holdsworth, good to see you this century, Peter, a guest of Peter Dakin. Michael Lee, a guest of Chris Wong and Debbie Fu. Jamal Harkini, a guest of Will Abdo. Is Jamal, did he make it here? G'day. Former councillor of the City of Melbourne in the Docklands area, from memory. Mike Gornell is a guest of Karen Gornell. Tony Murchell, a guest of Catherine Baxter. Yeah. And Carolyn Pilot, a guest of Marg Lesser. And Kerry O'Brien, a guest of Bruce Levitt. If you could make them all welcome with a wonderful big burst of applause, that would be terrific. Thank you. I'd like to ask James if you could come forward for induction into the membership of the club. I call on James's sponsor, Stephen Rando, to introduce him to the club.
President Phillip, gives me great pleasure to introduce the promotion of this outstanding club and on World International Friendship Day, James Scuderi, Director of Legocynetics. And James is really an outstanding member of the community, but more around what he's been doing around advanced stem cell technologies. And on a personalised regenerative health applications, he has developed a series of highly focused and specific stem cell technologies. And on that basis of Nobel Peace Prize technologies and science developed in 2012. James will hold a position of co-founder and director and will have the classification of Business and Trade International. He will be a member of the Central One Group. And as part of his membership of our great club, he will also be mentored by our past president, Robert Fisher, and will be known in the club as James.
All right. James Scuderi. You're Ben King. We welcome you as a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne. Today, you enter an organisation of more than 1.1 million members, more than 36,000 clubs in 221 countries, embracing the internationality of Rotary. We believe that you have the personal and professional qualities that will ensure the principles of Rotary will be safe in your keeping. The badge you've received, and I hope will wear with pride, indicates your commitment to the objectives of Rotary to which we all aspire, to encourage the self, the ideal of service above self. We expect that you will become an ambassador from us to the community in which you live, and we ask that you convey Rotary's aims in all that you do. We look forward to you pursuing with us the great work of Rotary. So with this expectation, I offer you the right hand in fellowship and ask that members rise and join me in welcoming you to the club.
Welcome, James.
I now invite you to respond, James.
Oh, thank you very much, Philip, and thank you for everyone that will serve here today. I did receive the note saying that a few words will be welcome, and to keep it fairly short, so I haven't prepared anything specific, but having had some fairly limited engagements with the Rotary over recent times through invitations of our great friend, Stephen Rando, it's wonderful to be here after having attended a few times and see so many familiar faces. I think it's a great testament, and one of the reasons why I was so honoured to be invited to join is that after having engaged with Rotary for such a short amount of time, as my father and my mother indeed have in other branches around the world, that I can look out amongst this group and see people who have already become wonderful friends and acquaintances. I should make a special mention of Dr. Peter Rogers, who has been a fantastic support of the stem cell interest that I've got that Stephen mentioned earlier. And I'm looking forward to making more connections with the great people here and adding value to the great Rotary tradition with everyone who's here. So again, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I look forward to getting to know everyone in much more detail in coming years. So thank you again.
Present. Okay. Each year our club takes part in nominating one outstanding young individual to study abroad at a university of their choice, fully funded through the Rotary Foundation Global Scholarship grants. This important initiative has been expertly guided over the years, first by Bob Phelps, who we saw bounding down the stairs today. Where are you, Bob? I can't see you. Right at the back there. And now by Carol Bond, who continues to manage inquiries and oversee the application process. This year, our nominee, Ashley, if you want to join me up here, Ashley, was successfully selected and supported by District 9800 as our outgoing global scholar. She joins us today before departing for Switzerland, where she will undertake a Master's of Law in International Dispute Settlement. And it's actually a good day, isn't it? Friendship Day for International Dispute Settlement. Prestigious joint program between the University of Geneva and the Geneva Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. So please join me in welcoming Ashley, who's going to let us know a little bit more about what she'll be doing.
Thank you very much, President Willard. Thank you, everybody, for a warm welcome. I'm very grateful to be here today and to really have the opportunity to say thank you to the Rotary Club of Melbourne for your support and to District 9800. I'm very excited to undertake my studies in Geneva. I leave Melbourne in 2 days, but we'll spend some time at home in Queensland before I head off towards the end of August. To tell you a little bit more about the program, it's a Master's in Law specialising in international dispute settlement, so focusing on the 4 legal mechanisms for resolving international disputes, both between states, over border disputes, as well as over trade disputes, really any form of dispute with an international element, whether that be under a contract or treaties between nations. My background is I've worked for a number of years as a lawyer in international and commercial arbitration. And I'm excited to have this opportunity with Rotary's support to reorient the trajectory of my career and to use those skills, hopefully to further one of Rotary's key focus areas in peace and conflict, the promotion of peace and conflict resolution. I think we can all agree, looking at the world events at the moment, that perhaps now more than ever, this is an important area of study. And I hope that with the confidence that the selection committee has shown in me, I can repay that and make a lasting contribution. I'm also incredibly grateful for the opportunity I've had so far to meet with so many Rotarians here at the Club of Melbourne and elsewhere within Melbourne. And I'm looking forward as well to meeting with my sponsoring Rotarians over in Switzerland and hopefully joining Rotary's impressive international cohort of service-minded individuals to make a difference going forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So it's still all the best from us, and I'm sure you'll be in touch. But we have some socks. Thank you, Philip. Hiking socks for those mountain meadows in Switzerland, but also some banners that you can exchange with your clubs overboard.
Thank you so much. I think these will keep me warm. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, thanks to Philip Embusby and his company again. 0808 event at Shrine. Annually, there are a series of events honouring General Sir John Monash, a most significant Australian for his professional, military and community leadership and service before and during and after World War I. As our second president, the club awards the annual Myers Medal on a date closest to the 8th of August, which commemorates the Great Battle of the Means, to an Australian that has reflected the values of General Sir John Monash, of leadership, integrity and service. Core values of Rotary. I'm very pleased to say that the recipient this year is Dr. Robert Webster, OAM, immediate past president of the RSL Victoria. Please join us for lunch next week and hear from a significant Australian. And also next week on Friday the 8th at 8 a.m, the annual commemoration of the Battle of the Means is on with a service at the Shrine of Remembrance. You are all welcome to attend, and a short service in the sanctuary of a shrine. It is a must experience. It hasn't got the Anzac Day crowds. So please contact Joe if you'd like to know more about how you could attend this event.
Rotarians and guests, our guest speaker today is David Olsson AM. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome David back to Rotary Melbourne, as David was a past active member of the club from 1997 to 2005. David is currently an international director of King and Wood Mallisons, currently based in Hong Kong, in the Shenzhen in China. He has over 30 years' experience in the areas of cross-border investments, corporate finance and financial markets, working with clients, industry bodies and governments in the Asian. David is the current national president of the Australia-China Business Council, Australia's peak business body to do with China trade. He has previously served as chair of the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Beijing from 2010 to 2013 and is a member of the Australian Government's Australia-China Council. He has established and chaired a private sector initiative to work with the Australian and state governments on a project that would promote the development of financial infrastructure and regulatory regime to support the use of the RMB, which is the Chinese currency, in trade and investment flows between Australia and China. He is also a passionate supporter of the New Colombo Plan, an Australian government initiative to encourage young Australians to study, live and gain work experience in the Indo-Pacific region. He is a member of the Council of the Australian National University Foundation. David was recently a member of the Prime Minister's recent visit to China, and so he can provide us with all the latest insights. It is therefore appropriate that David's address to us today is titled Australia and China Stabilised, Where to from Here? David Olsson.
Thank you very much, Chris, President Phil, and Rotarians and guests. It is indeed a pleasure to be back here. As Chris just said, it was 2007 when I left, and in fact, this table here has three of the four members that were there at the time. I was the Sergeant at Arms at the time. I believe that the Sergeant at Arms role doesn't exist anymore, which is a great shame, of course. But look, it is my great pleasure to be back here and to speak to you today. As Chris said, I've been in Rotary for a little while. Prior to Melbourne, I was in the Rotary Club of Sydney for a few years. But perhaps more importantly, I was born into Rotary, literally. My father, Jack Olsson, some of you may remember him or know him, was a very proud and active Rotarian of well over 55 years in the various roles. He was district governor, long-time member of the Rotary Club of Canberra, served on the Rotary International Committees with two very well-known Australians. One from this club, Royce Abbey, when he was international president, and Clem Renouf from Queensland. So I actually remember those gentlemen very well, and I was born and bred. I've also known many youth exchange students. So Ashley, congratulations on your scholarship, and I wish you all the very best in your studies in Switzerland. And I do hope that you have the same sort of experience with Rotarians and their families that I had. I perhaps had too many youth exchange students staying with us over time. They seemed to be there all the time, but I've retained a number of long friendships with a lot of those students over the years, and it's been really wonderful. The other thing I'd just like to point about my father, and it's not that I'm meant to be talking about China, but it plays to Rotary. But Dad played a very quiet but very effective role in re-establishing Rotary in Poland and Ukraine after the Cold War period. And a number of the people have come from Ukraine to Australia have become as a direct result of that. So I think it's testament to sort of the power and importance of Rotary. What I really saw out of all of that for me was, humility, commitment, and the deep sense of service that everybody in Rotary plays. And that's what really has driven a lot of what I've done in recent years, particularly in my roles within Kingdom of Madison's, or Madison's as you in Melbourne would know us, as law firm, which has expanded internationally with very significant operations around China and the region, but also as president of the ACBC. So to the topic, China and Australia. You've heard the mantra, we've stabilised or stabilising the relationship. I think the big question is, where do we go to from here? To answer that question, we've got to start with some context. Now, of course, all of you know this because we're all living and breathing it every day, but we're going through a period of massive global disruption at the moment. Geopolitical tensions, trade disputes, technological change, which is rising at an exponential pace, and supply chain disruptions. These changes are not cyclical. A few years ago, we might have said they were cyclical, will come out, but they're not. They're quite structural, and the world is going to change quite significantly. And this has a real impact for Australia. We're a trading nation. Our prosperity is very much dependent on our ability to engage, to connect, and work with other nations around the world, other trading nations. So any disruption of the trade flows, investment flows, people flows, technological flows into Australia and out of Australia will have a direct impact on our ability to be able to live happy and prosperous and safe lives. So the basic premise is that we have to remain connected and we have to remain regionally engaged. And we also need to build and rebuild many of the skills that we've lost over the years in terms of understanding our region, our Asian capabilities, and particularly our Chinese capabilities. China is central to all of this. China is our number one trade partner by a long way. We get, for every $1 in $3 of our exports comes from China. That's a massive figure. And to make it really, really stark, our exports to China exceed the exports to the next four nations, Japan, South Korea, United States, and India combined. So that's the scale of our economic relationship with China. It's also the reason why so many people are concerned about our relationship, because we are so dependent and so reliant on the China story. But there is no alternative market for us. There is no market that's big enough and no market that can pay the prices that they want to pay for our exports. So we have to work out a way of engaging with China and yet balancing everything else around our security. China also matters because it's also the number one trade and investment partner with every country in Southeast Asia. Every single country is the number one trading partner. Now, just pause and think. We have now launched a national initiative, our ASEAN 2040 strategy, launched by the government, to encourage Australian companies to invest more into the ASEAN region, to be more economically engaged. We can't do that unless we're cognizant of what China's actually doing there as well. It's their number one partner. They want to work with China. We're a small fry in that context. So we have to work out how to work with China in the region. So that's the context in which we're operating now. So let's talk about the stabilisation of the relationship. We have been through an extraordinarily difficult period with China. None of this has been our fault. We have really been a reliable trading partner with China for many years. We have wonderful people-to-people connections, wonderful relationships at the business level, even at academics level and political levels. It's all been very, very good. But China has imposed a number of economic coercive actions against our trade sectors, 15 of them in all, over a number of years. We thought it was originally just in relation to, customs issues and sort of technical issues, but it emerged after a while that there was something more beyond it. It was economic coercion. They were trying to get us to form a view in relation to China that was different to what we currently held at that time. So it was difficult. We then had a new government come into place 18 months, nearly 2 years ago, for the Albanese government, and they adopted a very different approach to engagement with China. Prior to that, it had been what's called the diplomatic loudspeakers, shouting at each other and calling things out very publicly. The Albanese government at that time, with Penny Wong as the foreign minister, took a very different approach. It was behind closed-door conversations, but very clear and principled, and a very disciplined government in terms of all the engagement. They adopted a mantra which seemed very simplistic at the time, but I think which has really set the groundwork for our future relationship. And that was, we will cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and act in our national interests. And that's the mantra and the philosophy that this government over the last few years has adopted in all its engagement with China. We will work where we can cooperatively, we'll do what we can where we think that it makes sense, we'll disagree and we'll call that out in the areas where we do disagree, but above all, we will act in our national interests. We'll only do things that support the people of Australia, our economy, and our long-term prosperity. Now, since that time, the government has re-established, through good diplomatic relations with China, our comprehensive strategic partnership. There aren't many nations in the world that have a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. Most of them that do are in Central Asia or what we might call the BRICS nations. We're one of the few Western nations that has this comprehensive strategic partnership. That means that we now agree that we will have a political framework for discussing every aspect of our relationship with China. We have our leader-to-leader meetings, foreign minister to foreign minister meetings, our climate change to climate change meetings, our economic ministers all meeting under a very structured arrangement. That was put in place more than 10 years ago and went into abeyance during the difficult period, but now it's been reinstated at the end of 2023. And we've now had 2 visits by the Prime Minister to China, the first in November 23, the last 2 weeks ago, under that bilateral structure. We've had China's Premier, Li Qiang, come to Australia in the alternate year last year. And what we've got now, I think, is a very well-structured, appropriate set of engagements at a political level, which is going to hold us in very good stead going forward. Because if you think about the thing that's holding back the world at the moment is lack of dialogue. And we now have a structure for that dialogue, and it appears to be working quite effectively now. So let me just tell you a little bit about what happened 2 weeks ago. So this was the second leader-to-leader meeting. Prime Minister Albanese meeting China's leader, which is Premier Li Qiang. He also met President Xi Jinping and the leader of the National People's Congress. So he met the top 3 leaders of China. This time, unlike a few years ago, he took with him a delegation of Australian business leaders, 14, from all sorts of sectors. So we had the CEOs of the major resources houses, Rio Tinto, BHP, Fortescue, Newscope. We had Sunrise from the agricultural sector. We had 2 universities there. We had quite a range of scientists and others. And I was fortunate to be part of that in my role as president of the ACBC. The ACBC, if you don't know us, as Chris said, we're the largest business council focused on bilateral relations with China. We have over 500 corporate members and around about 18,000 individuals associated with those companies. So we represent a large section of Australia's business engagement with China. So we're there. And what happened was we had 3 hours in the Great Hall of the Peking with 14 of the top leaders of China's businesses. I spent a dinner, 1 hour and a half, sitting next to the founder of BYD motor vehicles. There were other great leaders from the major banks and financial institutions and other companies in China. And we had dinner together and 4 hours of conversation and dialogue. It was an astoundingly good dialogue. And the thing that separated this from previous dialogues is it wasn't just 2 groups talking to each other. It was 2 groups that had permission from our leaders to talk to each other and who want to get on and do business together. So there's that real sense that its time is now right for us to engage. Our leaders want us to engage, and we'll take it forward. There were a number of very significant outcomes, economic outcomes. Possibly the most significant, and it won't necessarily affect you all directly in this room here, but was a decarbonisation of China's steel sector policy dialogue. So you had the top 6 Australian exporters and steel manufacturers in Australia with China's top 6. And there's a strategic intent now for us to work with China to decarbonise China's steel sector. Now, why would we want to do that? A couple of very good reasons. One, steel is one of the greatest emitters of carbon dioxide into the world at the moment. And because we're the largest exporter of iron ore and coal to China, we have a role that we can play in helping to decarbonise that sector. Perhaps more significantly, though, is that there are other players coming into the field now with better quality iron ore. Our iron ore in the Pilbara is of lesser quality now, having been degraded over many years. So iron ore coming out of Scimitar in South Africa and South America as well from Vale is going to supplant and be better quality, and China will want that. So our strategic decision at a government level is to work with China, with our industry, to find a way forward to keep our industry in the game. So you'll hear a lot more about green iron in Australia, where we use renewable energy to decarbonise the iron before it's been exported. So lots of great things like that. And there were talks about tourism, which were re-engaged, fantastic. Education space, I think we'll see more the reactivation of that, although there will be some limits on that, unfortunately, and across all sectors. So where do we go to from now? We're not going to look back to where it was in the past. The halcyon days of when I was up there in Beijing from 2007 to 14, those days have gone, where you could just walk in and do any sorts of business. It's going to be much more structured, much more clear around what we can and cannot do. It'll be structured around a partnership structure. So we work together in partnership for a common purpose. It'll be trade-based and investment-based, but there'll be a common purpose around it all. So whether it's green steel to that sector, or whether it's going to be working together to solve medical problems, health issues, or create educational outcomes, it'll all be purpose-driven. How am I going? Chris, for time? Got a few more minutes? Good, thank you. So, doing well. So there are whole areas where we do now have an area of opportunity to collaborate with China, which weren't open to us in the past. Donald Trump is giving us a free pass right now. I think it really is up to us to take advantage of that. The 14 people that I went with to China, together with the members of ACBC all around Australia, are really excited about this opportunity now. I've been down to Canberra. I've spoken with Deepa just last week. I spoke to the Chinese ambassador in Australia. Everybody's on track now. We want to make this thing work, and we're going to and do so in a way that's very structured, but also very cognizant of that national interest piece. We're only going to be doing things that at the end of the day is in our national interest, that supports our own interests. So what do we have to keep doing to make all this happen? Well, I think the first thing, we just need to keep this relationship on a steady path. There's a lot of fluffery in the papers. There's a lot of negativity in the newspapers and media. We can't control that. Everyone's entitled to their own views around all these things. But I think the key point is to recognise that you don't have to make a choice between our economic prosperity and our security requirements. We still can have alliances with our good friends in the United States and other nations. Britain now, for example, far more deeply embedded in our security thinking. But we can also balance that. We can recognise that we can work with China in strategic areas where it supports our national interests. So we've also got to invest in our Asia capabilities, and I touched on that right at the outset. Over the last few years, we have lost our national capability to be able to engage in language around the whole of Asia, and particularly now with China. We are not as fluent culturally as we were several years ago. There's a lot more work to be done. So it is exciting to see the next generation of students going into the region. As Chris said, I support Australia's new Colombo plan, which is an opportunity that's been given to every undergraduate student in Australia, every single undergraduate student in Australia, to spend a time in any country of their choice in the Indo-Pacific to study language, to get work experience, and come back with a better understanding of the region. The government is putting a lot of money behind that. So we need to keep that up, and we need to keep that going at a great level. And we need a new mindset at a national level. I think, from my perspective, looking at Australia from afar, I see a nation that's very much focused on its own navy. It's very domestically focused. I read the international newspapers, and there's very little about Australia. Very, very little at all, because it's not what we do is not directly relevant to what the rest of the world is doing.
and the change that's it's going through. So we need, as a nation, to be able to lift our heads up further, look across the horizon, and think about what's actually happening in other parts of the world that will have a direct impact on what we're doing. The starting point of that, of course, is Asia, Southeast Asia, the ASEAN strategy. We've got to be involved in that more closely. But we also need to deeply understand what China's doing. It's the biggest global player in the world at the moment. It's the most influential player. It will define our destiny, and we need to work out how we're going to manage with that. I've come away from these visits cautiously optimistic. Some of you may think that I'm over-optimistic. I know many naysayers and others who would have different views. But I do think we are entering a new era. The fact that we have our leaders talking to each other on a regular basis is hugely important, really important. We can't underestimate that. We now have businesses wanting to engage. That's super important. The challenge now is to bring the community along on this path and to understand that our future relies upon a peaceful, prosperous region, and that to do that, we've got to actively engage with that. So when I started talking about my father, I talked about, how he had gone about building some trust, his relationships in certain parts of Europe, even when there were great divides at the time. And I think what that shows and what Rotary shows is that through consistent effort, persistence, bridges can be built between people, in communities, and across borders. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm happy to take a few questions. Did I?
David has kindly agreed to take questions. So I'll get my secretary, Tony, to come with the microphone. Now, could you, before you ask the question, could you wait for the microphone, stand and introduce yourself and ask the question? Who's first?
Well, you are right. It is a charged question, and it was going a different way to the way I thought it was going to go. But the question is around, why should we trust the United States? Basically, is the question. I think we can trust the United States. They are a big, important nation. They are a big investor into Australia. I talked about trade before, but they remain a big investor. They are still a huge technological power. They do a lot of things right. Maybe Washington, the capital, do things that we're not happy with, but I think longer term, it's a relationship we can't walk away from. I think all of this is the same answer I gave in relation to China. I think we have to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time here. We've got to continue to maintain deep relationships with the United States. They are integral to our security at the moment. They are the provider of pretty well all the military support that we need and a lot of intelligence that we rely upon as a nation. We can have our views on whether AUKUS is the right strategy or not for a military relationship, but they are still a very powerful nation, and we do a lot of work with them, and they continue to want to work with us. So that's a really good starting point. China, on the other hand, offers a lot of other advantages. Technological superpower. Some of the things I've seen in China would just totally amaze you in terms of where they are. They still have enormous financial capacity, despite what we hear about the slowdown of their economy. They still have the ability to be able to do things. And they are influential particularly in the most important region to us, our region, where our regional neighbours continue to want to engage with China. They can see, the ASEAN nations, if you look around, they're all managing to do the chewing gum and walking together. They still want the relationship with the United States. They still want a good relationship with China. So I think it is possible. We don't walk away from relationships. We just have to be very clear-eyed about where the weaknesses are, and then acting in our national interest, which I think is something we've only started to think about more strategically in recent times. We just start to bolster up where we need to. And the other point I make is that I don't think anything's going to happen in the short term. We've got plenty of time to sort all this out. It's nothing going to happen tomorrow or next year or next 5 years, I don't think.
Well, my question is really, when I look through Asia, 30 or years been working through Asia, one of the things I say to myself, though, is reciprocity in business and in trade. And by that I mean, maybe we're very open as Australians and we allow people to come here, set up their business, get free title to the land, etc., etc. Whereas when I look at the things that we've done in China, in Indonesia, etc., etc., it seems to be done on a joint venture basis, and you've got no contact with the land. And so I sometimes say to myself, when we're dealing with countries, should we have a rule of reciprocity? If we can't buy your land, you can't buy ours, or am I naive?
Well, I think it is a nice thought that we all could, have exactly the same. But the reality is, different communities develop in different ways, different societies develop in different ways. And unfortunately, right now, we're moving to a period where the world is becoming more concerned about their own sovereignty. So we've all been born and bred in a world where trade has prevailed. We've been able to send anything, anywhere, at any time, immediate point in time, deliveries. But it's only during the pandemic that we've realised there have been gaps that can cause us great distress, when those supply chains break down. So everybody's scrambling at the moment to try and keep these supply chains within their own control. Now, it'll never work that way because no one nation is able to dominate the entire supply chain, unless perhaps you're China, possibly America. But most other nations don't have the wherewithal to be able to do everything themselves. So we'll have to continue to engage. And I think part of that process is how we create the rules that govern how we engage. This is complicated. I'm sorry. I'll try and keep this simple. But we've operated under a system operated by the World Trade Organization of free trade between nations. We've moved towards zero tariffs until fairly recently. And that's given us the ability to transact and do things. And by and large, we've been moving down a path of more reciprocity. Free trade agreements, regional comprehensive economic partnership around the whole of Southeast Asia, China and New Zealand, Japan and Korea, the world's biggest trade agreement. It's fantastic. It gives us this ability to go behind the barriers and do those sorts of investments you talked about. But unfortunately, a lot of that's now contracted rather rapidly. You're concerned. I hope that we'll get through the next couple of years and then we'll start looking again. Australia is very active, though, in saying we need fair, open, transparent trading system and investments, and we're going to continue to actively campaign for that. China is coming on board and saying the same sorts of things. So I think we're going to see some changes around the WTO and other trading forums in the next few years. So I meant to say that it could be getting better. So we've had difficulties obviously during the pandemic when visas are cut back. We've got issues at the moment in relation to students coming down to study in Australia. There's a very imminent announcement from the government in relation to international students and caps on that, which will have a direct impact on students. Students are really relevant to tourism because we've found historically that when students come down here, particularly from China, they bring their parents and their families and they tour around, and they are a very big contributor to the tourist economy in Australia. What has happened recently that is good is that the numbers have picked up from China in terms of tourists coming back into Australia. They're almost at pre-COVID levels. The challenge for us is that we're not prepared for it at the moment. We were moving pre-COVID to a situation where we were becoming more familiar with foreign students or foreign tourists coming down and creating signage right and payment systems that work for people from different countries. We put all that on the back burner for a few years. Now we've got to reactivate that. That's good. On the other hand, China has now opened up the gates and allows visa-free access to all Australian passport holders for 30 days. So you can go there without having to go to the consulates or the embassy to get your passport stamped in there. So that incrementally there's movement. We also had a really interesting conversation in Shanghai with Prime Minister about this. I expect there's some work going on at the moment around that, and we might see some more announcements in relation to two-way trade, two-way tourism trade.
One more question.
We're not that either. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure if you heard the question down there. The question was, if we go ahead with AUKUS, does this impact our ability to have good trading relations with other nations, China and around the region? I think the answer to that is, China, in particular, doesn't like AUKUS naturally, and you've got some other nations, Indonesia, not that happy as well because they think it upsets the balance of power in the region. But I think what's happened is that through what I think is really good government to government private discussions, good diplomacy, we've made it very clear to all the nations in our region what our stance is. So we're crystal clear about that. We've explained why we want to have this, why we feel we need to invest in this sort of security apparatus. So there can be no misunderstanding there. So, and yet, despite all that, trade figures with China continue to grow up. Every year now, our trade surplus in Australia's favour continues to get better. Our trade with ASEAN nations is continuing to grow. So I think it shows that, with proper conversations, you can separate the two, security and the economy, and find a way forward. There will be issues when things get a bit hotter, but we've got a good structure for resolving those disputes. And I think we've got somebody down here that will be sitting around the table in the next few years who will help us in that task.
Thank you, David. We're right on time. So, David, thanks very much for an interesting insights into our current trade position. It's good to hear that the very pragmatic stance the Australian government has taken on the policy with China. And I do like your address because you are a half glass full person, which is the best to be. So thank you very much for coming today to speak to us about the latest conversations with China. And as we always do, we have a small gift for you. Now, when you were here last, the gift to the speaker was always a bottle of wine. But now we have something much better. We have Rotary socks. Exclusive Rotary socks.
Fantastic.
Which from Phil Endersby's Wilderness Wear. And more important, they're 200% Australian. We'd like to thank all the visitors and guests here today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Also, thanks to MC Tony Battani and for reflections from Phil Endersby. And of course, we cannot forget our live lunch setup and reception team for their efforts. So please, if you can stay back a few minutes to assist with the pack-up, they would be most appreciated. Next week, the meeting is here at number 35, and we will be presenting our 2025 Monash Medal, recognising a significant Australian. As announced earlier by President Phil, our guest speaker will be Dr. Robert Webster, OAM, immediate past president of the Victorian RSL. We hope you can join us.